Okay, so Justin, this is for you. This is day one where I start to make my bread for the next week. And as you can see here, this is my starter, and I took it out of the fridge a couple of hours ago so that it comes up to room temperature. And this little mark here that I mark on it with a marker is from last week. So I'm gonna wipe that off and I shall show you what I do. So right down here I have my scale, and I take a new jar and turn on the scale, and it starts at 0. It tears out, which means the scale automatically subtracts the weight of this jar, and then it just goes to 0 so that I can add what I need from my starter. Okay, so then I grab a spoon, and what I'm going to do is, maybe I can do this. Yeah, that might work. Okay, so what I do is I take, I'll move this over a bit so you can see. I take 45 grams of this starter that's been in my fridge, but it's come up to room temperature. 45 grams. Oops, got a bit too much there. 48, take a titch out. Oh, 46, that's pretty close. See? 46 grams. And then I'm going to add to that, let's get a dish for this. I use all-purpose white flour, and has to be unbleached flour, because if you used bleached flour, that will kill the natural yeast that's active in the starter. So you don't want to use any kind of bleached flour. So here's my unbleached flour. And it's important that you put the scale back to 0 after you've added your 45 grams of starter. Then I'm gonna add 45 grams of unbleached flour. 44, that's hello there. Oh, now it's 48. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just subtract that, and then the other flour, usually I like to use whole wheat. Oh, this is getting all over the place. Put this back to 0. Okay, let's see, I'll shake this off here for part of it. Okay, I usually like to use whole wheat, but during this pandemic, I cannot find whole wheat in the stores anywhere, so I'm using dark rye flour, which is great. Actually, rye is quite good in your starter because it has a high degree of protein, which is good for the yeast to feed on, the natural yeast that it picks up in the air somehow. So I'm gonna add like 40, this, there, 48. 42 is what I actually wanted because I put a bit more of the white, so 42 is good. But generally it'd be 45 white flour, unbleached, and 45 either dark rye or whole wheat flour or multigrain, something like that. So now I'm going to add the equivalent amount of water as I added flour. So I'm going to add 90 grams of water. So put your scale back to 0. Come on. There we go. And the water should be lukewarm, okay? So I'm going to add 90 grams of water. Oops. A little bit more. You know what, to be perfectly honest, if I am slightly over or under on measurements, I'm totally okay with that. All right, so then I just take and you stir it up really, really well so that there is no dry rye flour left in this. And what we're doing here is it's called making the levain. And this is what I'm going to use. All of this that I just made in this jar is what I'm going to use for this week's bread recipe. So everything in here is what I use in the rest of the process. And then I scrape down, I'll see down there, there's still some dry. So I'll make sure I get it all mixed in, like so. Turn it around, mix it in. Okay, and then scrape down the sides, scrape off the spoon, and then that's good to go. So what I do with that now is I grab my marker. This is like a water-soluble marker. So I just mark kind of where that level is, because what I want to do is I'm going to just get a little baggie here. You want to cover up your jar with something that's going to still let a bit of air in, because it's the air where the yeast, like natural yeast that's in the air, is collected by the proteins in the flour. And so you want to have a cover on it, but a loose fitting. So I always just put a baggie on the top. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to my stove. I'm going to put the light on my stove, just the light. And so inside here, the heat of the light on inside the stove is just enough heat so that the yeast can start to form. And what I do is I wait until the levain has doubled. So that's why I made that mark with the marker on there. And when I check it, and it probably takes maybe a couple of hours, I just keep checking it. And when I see that it's doubled, then I'm ready to go on to the next step. So now you think to yourself, okay, so what am I going to do with this that's left over? So I still want to have leftover starter in my fridge so that when I come around to make bread again next week, I still have some starter to begin with. Because what I just put in the stove, I'm going to use all of that in today's recipe. So for this, what I do is I, let's see, I make another little batch. See, I don't want so much of it, because if you have a ton of, like this is quite a lot, right, left over, you just actually need a little bit of the original starter, and then the flour that you add to it is actually what feeding the starter means, because the proteins in the flour are what help the yeast to form. So you have a little bit of starter and then a lot of food, which is the flour and the water. So what I do with this is I get another jar like so, okay? And then to this one, I just usually add 30 grams of the original starter. So I'll add 30 grams of starter to this jar. Then I'll add 30 grams of the all-purpose flour, and then I'll add 30 grams of the rye flour, and then 60 grams of the water. I stir that up. And then what I do is I let that double again so it really gets going. I put that right in the stove beside the other one that I have rising. And I wait till it's doubled as well. And when it's doubled, I know that it's got some good life building in it. Then I pop that back into the fridge for next time. So I'll just go through that process so you can see it. Okay. So here's the original one. Back so you can see everything that I'm doing. I have nothing to stand on. Okay, I think you can kind of see. There we go. All right, so I've got my jar. I've got the starter from the fridge. Unbleached, all-purpose white flour, rye flour, lukewarm water. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to put in 30 grams of the starter, 22, 28, 30, perfection. Let's sorry to show you that, see? 30 grams. Started from the fridge, goes into this new jar, okay? Then make sure you can see what all I'm doing here. Good. Then I'm gonna zero the scale out to 0, add 30 grams of unbleached white. Okay, there we go. Zero out the scale to 0, and then 30 grams of the rye. I think the scale is the best, and you can get a scale. I got this one at Superstore for about, I think, 25 bucks. And I use it every time, and it just keeps all your measurements even and accurate. There's 30. And then zero it out to 0. And 60 grams of the lukewarm water. Here we go. 44, 34, 40, 60. There we go. Then, just like I did in this one, and it's not a big deal if you use this spoon, it's got a bit of starter on it. Stir it up. Get all the dry ingredients in there. All the way around the jar. Mason jars work, but what I don't like about the mason jars is that they have a smaller mouth, an opening, than the width of the jar, and it's kind of challenging to get in there and stir. So I like these jars that have a wide mouth so that you can really get your utensil in there for stirring. So that's just my thing that I like. Once again, scrape down the sides. So obviously this amount of starter that you've created here is less than the one I already put in the stove. And that's okay, because I just need a little bit to build up for next week. Now, this one here, that's for another video, but you can always use leftover starter like this. It's usually called discard, but there are lots and lots of recipes that you can use leftover starter in as an ingredient. What I tend to do is I tend to make a banana bread every week, and then there's lots of recipes for banana bread where you use discard starter. So that's something you can do with that. So on this one, once again, I mark where it is, put a baggie on top of that, like so. Then I'm gonna pop this one into the oven beside the other one. Make sure you can see the mark so you know how, and I know which is which, because the one that has a greater amount in it here is the one I'm going to use today in the rest of my bread recipe. This one here, once it's doubled, is the one that I'm going to pop back into the fridge, and it sits there until next week when I make bread again. So that's it. And we'll be back when I get ready to create what needs to happen for the rest of the bread. See you soon.